Humanity had always looked up at the stars with wonder. For centuries, people dreamed of exploring distant worlds, imagining civilizations that might be thriving far beyond the small blue planet they called home. As technology advanced, those dreams became reality. Humans built ships capable of traveling vast distances across space, venturing into regions of the galaxy that no one had ever reached before. It was a time of curiosity and ambition, but also one of caution. Humanity had learned from history that the universe was full of dangers, and every new world could hold surprises that might be deadly. On one of these distant worlds, there existed a species unlike any other. These beings were enormous, far larger and stronger than humans, and their bodies were built to survive the harshest conditions imaginable. Their planet was a death world, in every sense. A place where the air was often toxic, storms could tear apart mountains, and predators waited for the smallest sign of weakness. For countless generations, this species had lived and thrived in ways that seemed impossible. Their strength, resilience, and instincts had been honed to perfection. To outsiders, they appeared invincible, nearly untouchable, and untamed. They had seen many other species attempt to explore or settle their world, but none had survived long enough to leave a mark. The legends surrounding them were widespread across the galaxy, whispered among travelers, and written in old records. They were the strongest species anyone had ever encountered. Despite their fearsome reputation, the Deathworlders were cautious. They preferred isolation, watching quietly from their hidden cities and dangerous wilderness. They had little interest in the outside universe, believing that no one could truly survive the challenges of their home. The planet shaped their way of life in ways that outsiders could hardly understand. Strength was survival, and survival was everything. Their society was built on endurance, cleverness in combat, and an instinctive understanding of danger. Anything weaker could not last, and so their world remained free of outsiders, for now. Humanity, however, was different. The first human scout ships approached the Deathworld without realizing the full extent of the stories they had heard. The humans were cautious, but also driven by curiosity and ambition. Their missions were not simply about exploration, they were about learning, understanding, and sometimes proving themselves. When they arrived near the Deathworld, they were surprised by the planet's hostility. Storms erupted without warning, the terrain was rugged and unwelcoming, and creatures that could crush a human in moments roamed the land. Yet the humans pressed forward. Each setback was met with adaptation. They built machines to survive the toxic atmosphere, protective suits to withstand extreme temperatures, and drones to scout dangerous areas. Where others had failed and retreated, humanity found ways to continue. The Deathworlders noticed this new presence. From high cliffs and shadowed forests, they observed the small, fragile-looking humans navigating their deadly world. At first, the Deathworlders felt amusement. These beings looked weak, delicate, and entirely unfit to survive in such an environment. They expected the humans to perish quickly, as all others had before. But as days turned into weeks, the humans remained. They adapted to the dangers, finding ways to endure storms, predators, and treacherous landscapes. They were persistent, clever, and remarkably resourceful. The Deathworlders began to pay closer attention. Something about humanity's approach was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was not just their survival that impressed the Deathworlders. It was the way humans thought. Unlike other species who relied purely on instinct and brute strength, humans used creativity, teamwork, and learning from mistakes. They observed, experimented, and adjusted. If a storm destroyed their equipment, they rebuilt it smarter. If a predator attacked, they devised strategies to evade or distract it rather than confronting it head-on. The Deathworlders were used, to dominance and power being the only measures of success. But these humans had another kind of strength: flexibility, intelligence, and determination. Slowly, the Deathworlders began to feel something they had not felt in generations: curiosity. The humans also did not know the full extent of what they were facing. Legends had warned them of a deadly species, but the stories were vague, filled with exaggerations and mystery. What the humans saw were enormous, fast-moving silhouettes in the distance, shadows that seemed to vanish and reappear almost magically. Their sensors picked up movements and vibrations they could not fully interpret. The humans felt fear, but also excitement. This was a species unlike any other, and first contact could mean danger, knowledge, or perhaps both. Every decision mattered. Every step could determine survival. Yet, despite the dangers, the humans pressed onward with caution and determination. Over time, the first brief encounters occurred. Humans caught glimpses of the Deathworlders from a safe distance, huge, muscular forms moving with astonishing speed and precision. The Deathworlders watched as humans built temporary shelters, crafted new tools, and explored further into hazardous terrain. It became clear to the Deathworlders that these humans were not just another species to be avoided or crushed. They were survivors, capable of enduring what few others could. Something about their persistence challenged the Deathworlders' long-held beliefs about power and survival. As days turned into months, the presence of humanity began to influence the Deathworlders' perception of their own world. They began to see it not only as a place of danger, but also as a place where survival could take different forms. Strength could include intelligence, adaptability, and courage, not just sheer size or force. The Deathworlders began sharing small observations with one another, discussing the humans' behavior, and marveling at their persistence. The humans' arrival had set in motion something unexpected. A quiet but profound shift in the way the Deathworlders thought about strength, life, and survival. By the end of the first year, humanity had established a small outpost on the Deathworld, surviving the planet's many threats while observing the native species closely. And the Deathworlders, for the first time in centuries, were no longer entirely sure of their own supremacy. The galaxy had always told them they were the strongest, and for millennia it had been true. Yet here were humans, frail by comparison, yet remarkably resilient, intelligent, and determined. The first contact had already begun to transform them, though neither side fully realized it yet. The stage was set for a meeting that would forever change both species. Humanity's arrival on the Deathworld had sparked curiosity, tension, and wonder. The Deathworlders began to watch with more than instinct. They were beginning to think, to question, and to learn. And humans, ever adaptive, were ready to meet the challenge of survival in a place that had been considered unconquerable. The galaxy would soon witness a story unlike any other. Two species at the peak of their abilities, learning from one another in ways that would transform both forever. The first true encounter between humans and the Deathworlders was tense, filled with caution, curiosity, and a quiet undercurrent of fear. From the shadows of massive trees and jagged cliffs, the Deathworlders watched as humans moved with careful precision across the alien terrain. To the humans, the world seemed alive with danger. Every step could reveal a lurking predator. Every shadow could hide a threat. Yet, despite the constant peril, the humans moved forward, setting up small camps and observing the creatures that watched them silently. At first, both sides maintained distance, the Deathworlders' initial impression of humanity as fragile, and weak began to fade as they observed how quickly humans adapted to the hostile environment. Humans had developed new tools, protective clothing, and even modified their equipment to resist the planet's toxic atmosphere. They had small drones that scouted dangerous areas and sensors that could detect changes in the weather, earthquakes, and even the movements of nearby predators. The Deathworlders, who had relied on instinct and brute force for survival, found this combination of cleverness and determination fascinating. Humans, on the other hand, were aware that they were being watched. Their sensors often picked up unusual energy readings or movements that could not be explained. Sometimes, enormous shadows would move just beyond the trees or rocks, vanishing before the humans could approach. At night, they would hear deep, resonant sounds that echoed across the terrain, warnings perhaps or communication signals. Initially, humans felt fear. They had trained for dangerous encounters, but the sheer power and size of the creatures observing them was intimidating. Despite that, humans remained calm and methodical. Fear did not freeze them. It sharpened their instincts and motivated them to prepare more carefully. The first direct observation occurred when a group of humans moved through a particularly hazardous valley. The valley was notorious for sudden storms that could strip flesh from bone and for predators that could appear without warning. From above, the Deathworlders watched with interest as the humans carefully measured wind patterns, selected their path to avoid dangerous zones, and built temporary shelters capable of withstanding the worst conditions. They worked together, communicating in calm, precise ways that minimized mistakes. Even when a predator attacked, they were ready. One human distracted the creature while another repaired a damaged drone, ensuring the team remained safe. The Deathworlders had never seen such coordination. Survival on their world was always solitary, a matter of individual strength. Yet here were humans, surviving as a group, relying on intelligence, communication, and teamwork, rather than sheer power alone. Curiosity began to replace fear among the Deathworlders. They had always believed that their strength was unmatched, that any creature attempting to survive their world would fail. Yet humanity's resilience challenged this long-held belief. Humans were not simply enduring, they were learning, innovating, and even teaching each other in real time. Their actions seemed unpredictable to the Deathworlders, which only increased their fascination. What were these creatures capable of? How far could their adaptability go? Questions like these circulated among the Deathworlders, creating discussions that had not happened in generations. One day, a small encounter occurred that would become legendary among both species. A young human scout, exploring near a forest, came face to face with a juvenile Deathworlder. The creature was enormous compared to the human, its muscles rippling and eyes glowing in the dim light. The human froze for a moment, but then slowly reached out with a non-threatening gesture. The juvenile watched, curious rather than aggressive. For hours, the two observed each other from a safe distance. Neither made a sudden move. Neither attacked. It was a silent understanding, a recognition of intelligence and presence. The Deathworlders began to realize that humans were not just surviving, they were engaging with the world and its inhabitants in ways the Deathworlders had never considered. As these encounters became more frequent, both species began to learn from one another. Humans studied the Deathworlders' methods of moving silently, using the environment for camouflage, and sensing danger long before it appeared. The Deathworlders, in turn, began to observe humans' ability to create tools and modify their surroundings. They noticed humans using fire to repel predators, building shelters that could withstand storms, and using clever traps to catch dangerous creatures without putting themselves in harm's way. The Deathworlders began to understand that strength was not only physical. The humans' resilience came from intelligence, creativity, and the ability to plan and adapt. Over time, initial tension gave way to cautious curiosity. The humans maintained their distance, aware of the danger, but began experimenting with small interactions. They left food in neutral zones, hoping the Deathworlders might approach. They set up non-threatening signals, trying to communicate without provoking aggression. The Deathworlders began responding in subtle ways, watching, mimicking, and sometimes leaving tokens of their own. These small exchanges were tentative, but they represented the beginning of understanding. Both species were learning that the other was not merely a threat, but something more complex and capable. The Deathworlders' society began to shift, even in small ways. Philosophers and leaders debated the meaning of these humans' arrival. Some saw them as insignificant and fragile, while others began to recognize that humanity's persistence and ingenuity could not be ignored. The idea of strength began to expand beyond brute force and endurance. Perhaps, they thought, true strength included intelligence, adaptability, and cooperation. It was a concept that challenged the foundation of their beliefs, but it could not be denied. The humans were changing the way the Deathworlders viewed themselves and their place in the galaxy. For the humans, every day was a mixture of fear and excitement. They were learning how to survive in a world designed to kill, but they were also learning that they were not alone. A species of incredible power watched them constantly, observing their every move. The humans understood that these creatures could destroy them in moments, yet they also saw glimpses of curiosity, intelligence, and even restraint. It was a delicate balance, a test of patience, courage, and wisdom. Humanity had survived other dangerous worlds, but nothing had prepared them for the challenge of earning respect from the galaxy's strongest species. By the end of this phase, both species had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. The humans had proven their resilience and adaptability, surviving where others would have perished. The Deathworlders had begun to question what strength truly meant, realizing that survival was not only about power, but also about learning, adapting, and understanding. A foundation of respect, however cautious, had been laid. Both sides were aware that the first contact was just the beginning. What followed would test their abilities, patience, and willingness to change in ways neither had imagined. The stage was now set for deeper interactions, where learning, cooperation, and mutual respect would become crucial. Humanity had survived the initial trials, but the Deathworlders' influence was only beginning to reach their own society. Slowly, deliberately, the two species were moving toward a transformation that would affect not just their relationship, but the future of the galaxy itself. What began as a tense encounter would become a journey of discovery, understanding, and growth that neither humans nor Deathworlders could have predicted. As time passed, the encounters between humans and the Deathworlders began to shift from mere observation to a more meaningful exchange. What had started as cautious curiosity was now transforming into a subtle interaction that neither species could ignore. Humans had proven they could survive the planet's harshest conditions, but it was their creativity and persistence that truly caught the Deathworlders' attention. Slowly, the Deathworlders began to see that strength was more than physical power. It was also intelligence, adaptability, and the courage to continue despite danger. The first real steps toward transformation happened when the Deathworlders began experimenting with human ideas. They watched humans using simple tools in clever ways, devices that allowed them to control fire safely, traps that captured predators without harm, and shelters that could withstand the most violent storms. At first, the Deathworlders copied these techniques cautiously, curious to see if they would actually improve survival. They discovered that combining their own raw strength with human ingenuity created solutions that were more effective than either species could achieve alone. For the first time, the Deathworlders realized that learning from another species was not a weakness, it was an advantage. Humans noticed these subtle changes as well. At first, they thought they were merely being observed, but soon they began to recognize patterns in the Deathworlders' behavior. The creatures started altering the way they hunted, moved, and even communicated, showing signs that they were testing new methods inspired by the humans' actions. This awareness thrilled the humans, who understood that their influence was beginning to reach the very heart of Deathworlder society. It was a quiet form of transformation, invisible to the galaxy at large but monumental to those involved. Over time, more direct interactions occurred. Small groups of humans and Deathworlders began working in neutral zones, carefully observing each other while avoiding conflict. The humans shared knowledge about weather prediction, techniques for building stronger shelters, and strategies for avoiding dangerous predators. The Deathworlders offered insights into tracking, survival instincts, and ways to navigate the planet's harshest regions. These exchanges were slow and careful at first, but they grew more sophisticated as both species learned to respect the other's abilities. Each meeting became a lesson in cooperation, patience, and trust. The transformation was not only practical but also cultural. Deathworlder thinkers began to question the meaning of strength in ways they never had before. Was strength merely the ability to survive in a dangerous environment, or did it include intelligence, creativity, and teamwork? For generations, their society had valued power above all else, but humans challenged that idea simply by existing. Philosophers debated, engineers experimented, and leaders considered the advantages of adopting human strategies alongside their own. Slowly, a new understanding of strength was emerging, one that would redefine the Deathworlders' identity. Humans, too, were changing. Exposure to the Deathworlders' raw power and resilience reshaped their approach to survival. They learned to anticipate dangers with a precision they had never needed before. They adopted movement patterns and instincts that mimicked the Deathworlders' natural skill in navigating the harsh terrain. By combining human ingenuity with lessons learned from the strongest species in the galaxy, humans became even more adaptable, more cautious, and more capable. Each species was enhancing the other, and both were evolving in ways that neither could have achieved alone. One pivotal moment occurred when a particularly fierce storm struck the Central Valley where humans had established a base. The storm was unlike any humans had experienced before. Winds that could crush trees, torrents of acidic rain, and creatures forced from their usual territories in search of shelter. Normally, such a storm would have forced humans to retreat, but the Deathworlders intervened in subtle ways. They did not fight the storm for the humans, but they guided them indirectly, showing safer paths, warning of hidden dangers, and revealing natural shelters humans might not have discovered on their own. Humans survived the storm with minimal losses, gaining first-hand appreciation for the Deathworlders' knowledge and instincts. The Deathworlders, in turn, recognized the humans' ingenuity in applying the guidance effectively, reinforcing the lesson that intelligence and planning were as important as raw power. As months turned into years, communication between the species grew more sophisticated. Simple gestures, sounds, and signs became a kind of shared language, enabling humans and Deathworlders to coordinate activities without words. These interactions created bonds of understanding, trust, and mutual respect. Humans felt safer navigating the Deathworld, knowing that help, silent but reliable, was nearby. Deathworlders began to value cooperation in ways they had never considered. The once solitary apex predators were slowly integrating the concept of teamwork into their daily lives, influenced entirely by humans' presence and example. Cultural shifts began to ripple through the Deathworlder society. Communities that had once focused exclusively on survival began experimenting with activities that emphasized learning and cooperation. Young Deathworlders trained not only in combat, but also in observation, experimentation, and problem-solving. Elders who had lived decades insisting that survival depended only on brute strength now encouraged adaptability, creativity, and patience. Even their stories and traditions began to include lessons inspired by humans' approach to challenges. Strength was no longer defined solely by size or power. It now included the ability to learn, adapt, and cooperate. Humans, for their part, began to see the Deathworlders not as monsters or threats, but as teachers and allies. They realized that surviving on a Deathworld required more than equipment and preparation. It required understanding the environment, respecting its dangers, and learning from those who had mastered it over millennia. The humans' respect for The Deathworlders grew with every lesson learned, and this respect was reciprocated. The two species began to coexist in a delicate balance, each enhancing the other's strengths and covering weaknesses in ways that neither had anticipated. By the end of this period, the initial barriers of fear and distance had largely disappeared. Humans and Deathworlders were no longer simply observing each other. They were learning together, shaping each other's evolution. The Deathworlders had begun to embrace ideas of intelligence, creativity, and cooperation, while humans had incorporated lessons of resilience, instinct, and environmental mastery. Both species were transforming in ways that would define their future interactions. The planet, once a realm of isolation and deadly trials, had become a laboratory of mutual growth and adaptation. This transformation marked the beginning of something far greater than survival. It was a merging of strengths, a fusion of abilities, and the start of a relationship that would forever alter the identities of both species. The humans had survived where others failed, not through brute force, but through ingenuity and perseverance. The Deathworlders had begun to see that their greatest strength was not just in power, but in the capacity to learn, adapt, and transform alongside a worthy partner. The galaxy had yet to witness the full extent of this transformation, but its foundation had been laid quietly, subtly, and irresistibly. As the years passed, the relationship between humans and the Deathworlders deepened in ways that no one could have predicted. What had started as cautious observation and mutual curiosity had grown into collaboration, learning, and subtle friendship. Both species were transforming not only in their skills and understanding, but also in their culture and society. The Deathworlders, once solitary and driven purely by survival, were beginning to see value in ideas that humans had long embraced: teamwork, communication, and innovation. At the same time, humans were learning to respect instinct, patience, and raw resilience in ways they had never known. The first sign of true cultural fusion appeared in the way both species began to train together. Human engineers, scouts, and explorers would join Deathworlder young in their daily exercises, teaching new ways to solve problems while learning from the Deathworlders' natural abilities. Deathworlders, enormous and powerful, moved with precision and skill that humans could never match physically. Yet humans contributed clever methods, teamwork strategies, and technology that enhanced the training exercises. Together, they created hybrid techniques that combined instinct with ingenuity. Young Deathworlders learned how to anticipate threats not just with strength, but with planning. Young humans learned to react quickly and instinctively, adopting lessons from the Deathworlders' natural awareness. Beyond training, practical life also began to show fusion. Humans and Deathworlders started sharing shelters in neutral zones, places designed to withstand storms, predators, and the harsh environment. Humans introduced simple innovations: protective barriers, ventilation systems, and renewable energy sources adapted for extreme conditions. Deathworlders, in turn, guided humans to the safest locations, taught them how to use natural materials, and showed them how to read signs in the environment that humans could have missed. Over time, these shared spaces became more than shelters. They became centers of learning, experimentation, and understanding. Humans and Deathworlders would sit together, exchange observations, and solve problems as equals. Daily life also began to include new rituals and competitions. What had once been survival exercises for the Deathworlders became games that tested strength, strategy, and creativity. Humans participated not only to survive, but to learn, adapt, and challenge themselves in new ways. Deathworlders, who had never valued these activities outside of combat or hunting, began to appreciate the joy of testing skill in a safe environment, seeing humans' enthusiasm and curiosity as a form of strength. Competitions became shared experiences that built respect, trust, and even a sense of community across species. Communication improved steadily. Humans and Deathworlders developed a combination of gestures, signals, and simple sounds that allowed them to coordinate actions without relying solely on speech. These forms of interaction grew sophisticated over time, enabling humans to navigate dangerous areas more safely and Deathworlders to test new strategies in hunting and survival exercises. With each exchange, both species learned to anticipate each other's movements, respect limits, and share knowledge efficiently. It was a silent form of teaching that emphasized observation, trust, and cooperation. Food, too, became a point of cultural exchange. Humans introduced crops and preserved rations adapted for extreme conditions. Deathworlders, who had relied on hunting and foraging, shared techniques for capturing and preparing native plants and animals safely. Over time, mixed meals became a symbol of mutual respect, recipes that combined human ingenuity with Deathworlder experience. Sharing food was not just practical, it was symbolic. It represented the blending of two worlds, the acceptance of each other's strengths, and the willingness to learn from differences. Art and storytelling began to merge as well. Humans brought concepts of visual expression, recording their experiences. Through sketches, diagrams, and models, Deathworlders contributed stories of survival, triumph, and caution that had been passed down for generations. Together, they created narratives that captured both human creativity and Deathworlder instinct, preserving lessons of adaptation, resilience, and cooperation. These stories were shared across both communities, inspiring younger generations to respect both intelligence and strength. Perhaps the most profound change occurred in the mindset of the Deathworlders. Their society, once defined by solitary survival and dominance, began to incorporate the value of learning from others. Philosophers and leaders debated what it meant to be strong in a galaxy filled with intelligent species. They realized that strength was no longer simply about overpowering an environment or enemies. It was about the ability to adapt, innovate, and cooperate. Humans had shown them that intelligence and flexibility could be just as powerful as muscle, speed, or instinct. This revelation changed education, leadership, and even personal relationships among the Deathworlders. Humans, for their part, were becoming more confident and capable. Living among the Deathworlders, they had adapted to a world that tested them constantly. They could predict storms with more accuracy, move through dangerous areas with less risk, and solve problems that previously would have seemed impossible. At the same time, they had learned patience, observation, and subtle forms of communication that the Deathworlders used naturally. The combination of human ingenuity and Deathworlder instinct created a species-level enhancement, making both more capable than ever before. The blending of culture and knowledge also had practical consequences for the planet itself. Humans and Deathworlders began modifying certain areas to make survival safer while still respecting the planet's challenges. They created safe passages, reinforced shelters, and observation posts, all while leaving most of the environment untouched. It was a cooperation that balanced human technology with Deathworlder instinct, showing that survival did not need to come at the cost of the natural order. By the end of this period, the Deathworld had transformed from a place of isolation and danger into a hub of interaction, learning, and mutual growth. Humans had survived and adapted, but they had also influenced the Deathworlders' thinking, society, and culture. Deathworlders, once solitary and proud, had begun to value communication, creativity, and cooperation, seeing these traits as forms of strength. The two species had begun to create a shared world, a hybrid culture that neither could have built alone. The galaxy beyond the planet had yet to take notice, but a quiet revolution was taking place. The humans had changed the Deathworlders' perspective on strength, survival, and society. In turn, Deathworlders had shown humans new ways to endure, thrive, and respect the power of instinct and resilience. The lessons learned in this remote world would ripple outward, influencing both species' future colonies and interactions. The stage was now set for the final chapter of transformation, where both humans and Deathworlders would realize the full impact of their shared journey and prepare to take that evolution across the stars. This period of cultural fusion marked a turning point. Humans and Deathworlders were no longer simply coexisting. They were building a partnership. Together, they had created something new, a shared society where survival, intelligence, and strength were intertwined. Both species were evolving in ways that would redefine their identities, not just on this death world, but across the galaxy itself. The changes that had begun with cautious observation were now irreversible, shaping the destiny of two of the most remarkable species the universe had ever known. Years had passed since humans first set foot on the death world, and the changes were now undeniable. The once solitary and fearsome Deathworlders had transformed into a species capable of cooperation, reflection, and even creativity. Humans, once fragile by comparison, had grown stronger, wiser, and more adaptable, absorbing lessons from the Deathworlders' instincts and raw power. Together, the two species had created something unprecedented, a partnership that would forever change both of their destinies. The final phase of their transformation began with the recognition of each other's strengths on a deep, personal level. Humans had always relied on ingenuity, curiosity, and planning to survive. Deathworlders had always relied on instinct, strength, and resilience. When these approaches were combined, they created a synergy neither species had anticipated. In training, exploration, and survival exercises, humans and Deathworlders learned to anticipate each other's moves, communicate without words, and solve problems with a combination of logic, intuition, and creativity. Tasks that would have been impossible alone were now achievable together, and both species recognized the value of this new perspective. One remarkable change was in leadership and decision-making among the Deathworlders. Previously, their leaders ruled through strength and dominance, and decisions were made with little room for discussion or debate. Now, influenced by humans' collaborative methods, decisions began to involve counsel, observation, and strategic planning. Leaders consulted with humans, considering new perspectives and analyzing outcomes before taking action. Strength was no longer defined solely by power. It now included wisdom, adaptability, and the ability to learn. This shift transformed Deathworlder society from one of strict hierarchy to one that valued insight and cooperation, creating a more balanced and capable community. Humanity, too, experienced profound growth. Living alongside creatures whose raw physical power dwarfed their own forced humans to adapt in every aspect of life. Their technology improved, inspired by lessons from the Deathworlders' efficiency and instinctive methods. Humans became faster, more aware, and more strategic, learning to anticipate dangers and use the environment to their advantage. At the same time, humans retained their natural creativity, curiosity, and adaptability, making them formidable in ways that complemented the Deathworlders' strength. Together, the species formed a partnership where each enhanced the other, producing abilities neither could achieve alone. The cultural impact was equally profound. Rituals, celebrations, and competitions now incorporated elements from both species. Humans introduced games of strategy and invention, while Deathworlders shared contests of endurance and instinct. Festivals became occasions for learning and growth, where young humans and Deathworlders trained together, shared stories, and celebrated achievements. Art and storytelling evolved, blending human creativity with Deathworlder wisdom and experience. Songs, visual displays, and oral tales combined lessons of survival, adaptation, and cooperation. Through these shared traditions, both species began to see themselves not just as survivors, but as members of a larger, shared culture. Another important aspect of transformation was exploration. With combined knowledge and abilities, humans and Deathworlders began to explore regions of their planet and surrounding space that neither could have tackled alone. Humans brought technology and careful planning, while Deathworlders contributed raw strength and instinctive understanding of harsh environments. Together, they mapped treacherous terrains, navigated storms, and documented wildlife with unprecedented accuracy. The discoveries they made were not only practical but also deeply inspiring, demonstrating that survival, understanding, and growth could coexist. The Deathworlders' perspective on the galaxy also shifted. Once isolated and convinced that no other species could rival their power, they began to see that collaboration could amplify strength in ways they had never imagined. Observing humans, they learned that intelligence, flexibility, and empathy could be as valuable as raw power. They began to consider the possibility of interacting more openly with other species, not from a place of dominance, but from curiosity, learning, and shared growth. Humanity had opened their eyes to a broader universe, one filled with potential, allies, teachers, and friends, rather than only threats and competitors. For humans, the partnership offered more than survival. It provided perspective, inspiration, and confidence. They had learned to live in a world designed to destroy them, guided by creatures whose instinct and power had once seemed insurmountable. They had learned patience, observation, and subtle communication, gaining skills that would carry them far beyond this single death world. The humans' respect for the Deathworlders grew with every lesson, and this respect was reciprocated. By working together, both species had discovered strengths they never knew existed, transforming not just survival, but identity itself. The greatest test of their partnership came when a particularly dangerous period struck the planet. A combination of storms, earthquakes, and predator migrations threatened the settlements and research stations humans and Deathworlders had established together. For the first time, they faced a challenge that required absolute trust and coordination. Humans applied strategic planning, creating evacuation routes, shelters, and protective systems. Deathworlders relied on instinct, strength, and environmental awareness to guide and protect the groups. The two species moved in perfect synchronization. Predators were avoided, storms were navigated safely, and no lives were lost. This event proved the true power of their collaboration. Survival, growth, and adaptation could be achieved not by one species alone, but by working together. After the crisis, both species realized that their transformation was complete. Humans had become stronger, wiser, and more adaptable. Deathworlders had become thoughtful, collaborative, and open to learning. The planet itself had been transformed, not in structure, but in spirit. A new society existed, one that valued both strength and intelligence, instinct and creativity, independence and cooperation. What had begun as cautious observation had culminated in a partnership that would endure for generations. Galactic historians would later look back on this period as a turning point. Humanity, once seen as fragile and vulnerable, had proven its resilience and ingenuity. The Deathworlders, once feared as unmatched predators, had discovered that true strength included learning, adaptability, and cooperation. Their encounter became a model for interspecies collaboration, showing that even the strongest and most isolated beings could be changed for the better through understanding and shared experience. In the end, the Deathworlders and humans had not merely survived. They had thrived together. Their mutual influence reshaped both species in ways that were irreversible and remarkable. The galaxy had witnessed a transformation unlike any other. Two extremes, one fragile and clever, one powerful and instinctive, combining strengths to create something greater than either alone. The Deathworlders' view of the universe had expanded. Humanity had grown in skill and confidence, and both had discovered that true strength lay not in isolation or dominance, but in learning, adapting, and evolving together. And so, the story of humanity and the strongest Deathworld species became a legend. It was a story of courage, patience, and transformation, a tale that proved the universe itself could be changed when beings dared to learn from one another. Both species had entered the encounter as strangers and emerged as partners, transformed, forever in ways that would echo across generations and across the stars. The Deathworlders had discovered new dimensions of strength, and humanity had discovered resilience beyond imagination. Together, they had forged a future neither could have reached alone, leaving a legacy of cooperation, respect, and shared destiny that would inspire the galaxy for centuries to come.